This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in places that could expose you to identity theft. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, their US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
With the election of Donald Trump, staying informed is more important than ever, and we're thankful you've chosen to listen to the DSR Network. Through the turbulent times ahead, we will continue to provide the insightful expert analysis on the issues that matter most around the world. We ask that you consider becoming a member to support our effort to provide you the best content possible. DSR members gain access to an ad-free listening experience, exclusive members-only segments of our shows, our members-only Discord community, and more. Use code HOLIDAY25 to get 50% off of your membership subscription at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code HOLIDAY25 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. The DSR Network will evolve in exciting ways in the new year, and we hope you'll join us.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. Over the weekend, ABC News shocked the political world by reaching a $15 million settlement with Donald Trump in a defamation lawsuit he'd brought against the network. Some experts have said ABC could have potentially won the suit. This comes after Trump raged at ABC News throughout the campaign, and many observers are seeing the settlement as a potential sign of capitulation to him. Notably, this comes even as Trump just openly declared that he thinks he's tamed the media, and if not, it's his full intention to do so in a second term. Today we're talking about all this with Anne Applebaum of The Atlantic, the author of Autocracy, Inc., who wrote a good piece before the election arguing that Trump is trying to condition voters to accept authoritarian rule. That's unfortunately even more relevant right now. Thanks for coming on, Anne.
Thanks for having me.
So ABC News has now agreed to pay $15 million to support the future Trump Presidential Foundation and Museum. There will be something like that, apparently. Trump had sued because George Stephanopoulos had said in a question that Trump was found liable for rape in the E. Jean Carroll lawsuit. The details are a bit complicated, but it's not at all clear ABC would have lost if it had kept fighting. Your thoughts on this outcome, Anne?
So Trump issues libel suits and other kinds of suits, the way other people buy cups of coffee. He's been doing it for years. It was one of his business tactics. And he does it as a form of intimidation, just to make people think twice and make them spend money and make them waste time. And really the best thing for news organizations to do would be to resist it, because if you resist it, if you make him spend the money on lawyers and him waste time, then you win. What's really disturbing about this one is I don't know the legal details, but it sounds as if ABC certainly had a chance of winning. They could have kept going, and they've decided not to, and given really quite a large settlement to a so far non-existent Trump charity, supposedly, in order to make the suit go away. And that looks less like prudence on the part of a news organization and more like, let's not be in any kind of fight with the president who we know might use other tools against us. And that's ugly. And that's not the way we're used to seeing brave news organizations behaving.
Right. The critical point you raised there is that news organizations in these situations tend to take on this fight on principle.
Or they have done for many decades. Yeah. I mean, news organizations will resist, frivolous libel suits because they know that once they've conceded to one of them, then others will do the same.
In your piece, you write that Trump is adopting a standard authoritarian tactic in a more general sense, which is to prepare the public to accept an authoritarian role for the state. It seems like we're seeing something similar right here. Can you talk about that broader tactic?
So, yeah, I mean, Trump during the election campaign used all kinds of language, from calling his opponents enemies of the people or enemies of the state, calling immigrants vermin, using language that hasn't really been part of American politics before. He issued endless threats towards individual journalists, towards the media more broadly, towards particular judges, towards various enemies. And of course, he kept doing that and has been doing it even more loudly since the election. And some of the purpose of this is not just, letting off steam. What he's doing is making other people afraid to criticism or to criticize him, or afraid to hold him to account. So he's creating around himself this atmosphere of anger and menace. And it looks like in a number of cases it's succeeding. And, ABC is one example. There are a number of other examples, from Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post, to the editor of the LA Times, of other news organizations or news owners saying, right, let's back away, or let's not pick a fight, or let's concede something in advance, because they don't want to be involved in some kind of open fight with the president. And it's particularly notable that this is happening in the case of news organizations whose owners have other businesses. So that would be true of the LA Times, the Washington Post, and also of ABC, which is owned by Disney. So they have other businesses. They have lots of interests with the federal government. They have regulatory issues, and that it looks like they're making concessions in advance so that they don't run into trouble down the line. And since I can anticipate what your next question would be, which is this a pattern, and is it something that we've seen before in other declining democracies? And of course, the answer is yes, it is. That the way in which it's not so much censorship, but media control and intimidation works in a place like Hungary or Turkey is not just government censorship. The government doesn't tell people what to write. Instead, the government finds ways of putting pressure on the owners of media, sometimes on journalists, in order to make them think twice before they say anything critical.
Well, in fact, the larger story here with ABC News really underscores what you're saying there, the story you're telling there. Remember, during the campaign, Trump viciously attacked ABC News, in particular for fact-checking him during the one debate. And at the time, Trump threatened to retaliate for that against ABC by revoking broadcasting rights. By the way, I should note that the New York Times reports that ABC executives have met with Trump transition team officials at Mar-a-Lago. God knows what was discussed, but here's what we have. Trump attacks ABC for telling the truth about him, threatens direct retaliation if he wins. Trump sues for defamation. Now ABC decides not to fight, even though news orgs do this generally, and instead will donate $15 million to something that lionizes Trump.
We'll see how other news organizations react, and it's going to be particularly interesting. Those that are smaller, that have fewer conflicts of interest, whether they'll be able to hold out. But many people assumed in the past that the news media in the U.S. was too big and too diverse and too complex to be intimidated the way the Hungarian news media is. Hungarian news media, by comparison, is tiny and weak. But this is a moment when, for other reasons, the business model of much media is in trouble. A lot of them are either unprofitable or not as profitable as they were. A lot of both broadcasting and newspapers. It's not true of everybody, but it's true of many. And you have an enormous amount of churn and uncertainty. And at this particular moment in history, it means that owners are more likely to be wary. If we were at a moment when the media was making lots of money, as it once did in the past, or when it was expanding and everybody was hiring, things might feel different. But right now it feels like things are shutting and closing down and staff are being let go. And I think that adds another layer to the current circumstance. It has nothing to do with Trump, but Trump is able to take advantage of it, clearly.
So on Friday, Trump had this to say about the media during an appearance on Wall Street, and I think it goes directly to what you're saying. Listen to this.
We did a good job. We had a great first term, despite a lot of turmoil caused unnecessarily. But the media's tamed down a little bit. They're liking us much better now, I think. If they don't, we'll have to just take them on again, and we don't want to do that.
And this looks to me like Trump knows that the media is in a vulnerable and precarious spot, and he's really putting them on notice to a greater degree that more of this is coming. Let's put this into your framework. Is this the sort of conditioning of Americans you're talking about, in addition to sending a message to the media? What is he conditioning Americans to accept here?
Well, he and not just him. I mean, it's been an kind of coordinated campaign. He and others have been seeking to attack and undermine journalism and the basis of journalism for a long time. And I know perfectly well that there's good and bad journalism out there, and lots of TV journalism was pretty weak and, clickbaity, and lots of newspapers have made mistakes. I wouldn't deny that. But they're also attacking the very idea that there can be journalism. In other words, that there is such a thing as people going off into the real world, observing something, talking to people, writing about it, fact checking it, and then publishing it, with the possibility that if they have made a mistake, they'll print a correction the next day. That idea that that's possible and that there's something good about that, and that form of communication or description of the world has a value, is itself under attack. And I think, we know that a lot of Americans don't read that kind of journalism anymore, that kind of information. I mean, it's not always just journalism, and are instead turning to podcasts or Instagram or other forms of media or entertainment where they get information and they get ideas, but they haven't gone through anything like that process. And that's the result of a lot of things. Some of it's commercial, some of it's behavioral, and some of it is the result of people like Trump or Musk, or others in the right and far right world, and some far left world too, I should say, attacking anything that looks like journalism, and criticizing it, speaking disparagingly about something called mainstream media, as if there were still such a thing, and acting as if it has some agenda that is anti-American or something else. And so, we have actually a decade of this now. I mean, it's not more than a decade, actually. I mean, if you could take it back 20 years if you wanted, but the attack has grown more concerted and louder and more effective in the last several years. And as I said, it's been accompanied by this corresponding decline in journalism and, to some cases, in the quality of journalism. And that's, that gets us where we are. So it's true that a lot of Americans would hear Trump saying, "I'm in control of the media now," and either not care or not be very shocked, or say, well, that's good. Media was terrible, and now Trump will take charge of it.
Just to pick up on a point you made there, what's under attack here is the very idea of journalism. It's the fact that this is journalism that's subjecting it to attack. I think it's lost on a lot of people, a lot of observers, that what Trump is doing and what MAGA is doing, it's a whole movement, is attacking the very act of telling the truth about him and them.
Deck your home with Blinds.com. DIY or let us install. Free design consultation. Free. Plus free samples and free shipping.
Head to Blinds.com now for up to 45% off select styles plus a free professional measure. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Well, I mean, of course, that's the effect. I mean, the reason to do it, and Trump has said this. I'm now not remembering the interview. I think it was with Leslie Stahl. I mean, he said before, he's said in public, of course I attack you because I don't, I don't want you to criticize me. He wants to undermine any criticism of him or any reporting of him in advance, so that when people are told about a corruption scandal, and there are some that have already begun, or when they're informed about what the administration is doing, what his administration is doing, or when they're told, describe to them the background of the various nominees or appointees to his administration, he wants people to say, right, I don't trust any of that. I don't believe any of that. I'm going to listen to, I'm going to let the president decide, or I'm going to listen to Tucker Carlson, or I'm going to go and read I'm going to go read up on wellness on Instagram and YouTube because, I feel safer in that space. So that's the purpose of it. I mean, when you undermine journalism, and by the way, this goes for judges and the legal system and the prosecutors, meaning that, the attorney general as well, and the Department of Justice, when you undermine those things, that can have two effects. One is it makes it easier for you to go after your enemies, but it also makes it easier for you to protect yourself. So if there's a biased or partisan system in place, then it's much easier for you to commit crimes or to be corrupt, or not even to commit crimes, but to be corrupt in a broader way. I mean, you see this any kind of declining democracy, and again, look at Hungary, look at Turkey, look at Venezuela. If sooner or later becomes pretty profoundly corrupt, because the effect of tearing down those institutions, anything that creates transparency and accountability, whether media, courts, law enforcement, inspectors generals of various different kinds, when you tear that down, then you make it much easier to get away with things in secret.
I mean, you make this point in your piece artfully, I think, that once the public accepts these types of tactics, it just paves the way for the next step. So using your framework here, Trump is essentially getting the public to accept the idea of using the state to suppress independent truth-telling about the leader and his followers. What do you expect to unfold here, given the international context?
So again, we're a large country. There's a lot of different kinds of media. There's the New Republic. There's the Atlantic. There's Substack. Although I don't know how that's a mixed bag. I think even speaking as somebody who's on it, but there's a there's a range of other media and other sources of information. There are a number of nonprofit forms of media now that are gaining some traction. So I don't think we're not looking at a wipeout of all information anytime soon. I don't think they're not looking at the elimination of all news or all information. And actually, now it's more incumbent than ever upon Americans to make sure that they know what it is that they're reading, to make sure that they're paying for some outlets or for some sources of information that still do fact checking and still do reporting. So there will be something, but there is a danger that large media, once again, especially when owned by someone who has other conflicts of interest, could become intimidated and could begin to tell its reporters to be careful what they say. I mean, so again, the real danger isn't censorship. It's not like there's going to be a censor who's going to come on TV and say, you can't say that. The danger is that people start to self-censor. People start being careful about what they say. They think about the consequences, about the frivolous lawsuits that might come if they say something that could conceivably offend the president. I think that's the world we're entering. Not for all media, not for every journalist. I'm sure it will still be possible to find good information, but it could happen at some outlets.
It sounds to me like you think that, generally speaking, the free press in the United States is still a very robust institution. It's very large. It's comprised of a lot of different interests. And there's a very strong journalistic tradition among the reporters and editors that could make it very hard for an owner or an executive in the type of position you're talking about to try and manipulate coverage or bring about self-censorship, at least relative to some of these other deteriorating democracies. Is that right? Is that your fault?
I'm simply trying to look at the bright side, I mean, I didn't think we're facing some kind of wipeout. At least that's not what I see right now in December, 2024. I still see a pretty broad range of sources of information available, but in some of the key mass media, in some of the television news programs, in some newspapers, yeah, you might begin to see that. You might begin to see self-censorship and nervous executives telling journalists to be careful what they say. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably already happening. I wouldn't be surprised at all. So I'm saying something a little nuanced. I want to say that there is still information to be had, and we're not talking about the threat of becoming North Korea. We're talking about losing some of our larger media. We're talking about people becoming worried and afraid and scared about what they can say, and to a degree that we aren't used to. So everybody's I mean, I don't know how to say this the right way, but I mean, it's normal to think twice about what you say when you're going on television. I mean, that's fine. You should seek to be careful. But what we're talking about is the coming of a moment when people are specifically afraid to say something that would affect Trump, because he might then launch a frivolous lawsuit, or because he might use his power over broadcasting regulation to take your organization off the air, or because he might intimidate your CEO who has some other interest with him. I mean, so that's the aspect of it that's new.
Just to wrap this up, what recourse do news consumers and the broader public have here? Recently, when the Washington Post shelved its editorial endorsing Kamala Harris, as you know, there was an enormous outcry. Enormous numbers of people canceled their subscriptions. There was a debate about whether that was the right thing or whether it would further weaken the press as an institution. I got to think that in some way, you got to do that kind of thing in order to exert pressure on institutions not to fold. What does your experience in the international context tell you about the prospects for that type of thing to work?
I don't know that there's an equivalent in the international context, because the numbers of readers that U.S. papers have is so much larger than so many other places. I mean, not everywhere, but in most places. But of course, everybody's within their rights. I mean, if people don't want to subscribe to the Washington Post anymore because of Jeff Bezos, then I understand it. I kept my subscription. I still think the Washington Post does great reporting. They have columnists that I like to read. I used to work there. I admire a lot of people there, and I'm going to keep reading it. But if people would rather not pay Bezos or pay for that, then I understand. I would only ask that people find something else, find another organization, find another news organization that you can read and support, because your time and attention, any time and attention that you spend on actual journalism, as I said, material that someone's got out into the world to procure and has sought to, package for you to read, and has tried to fact check it and will correct it again if it's mistaken. I mean, any time you spend reading that as opposed to reading, social media posts or flipping through Instagram is time well spent. And whatever investment you can make in that, and whatever investment, both of your time and of your money, is useful, both for you and for the rest of us.
It's a brutal dilemma, isn't it, Anne? Because on the one hand, objecting to, or on the one hand, canceling subscriptions and so forth does weaken independent truth-telling institutions. But on the other, readers and news consumers don't have a lot of recourse other than that, right? I mean, you do want to let your institutions that you're loyal to and that you learn from daily know that capitulating in these situations is unacceptable, and there's not any good way to do that other than this. So what do you think? I mean, it's a tough dilemma, isn't it?
It's a tough dilemma, and everyone's going to resolve it the way that's best for them. I fully understand why people would cancel subscriptions to the Washington Post. Yeah.
Do you think that in the end, Trump wins against the press or not, or somewhere in between? How bad could it get?
I don't think it's going to be win and lose. I think it's going to be an ongoing struggle and dilemma for everybody who works in the media and for everybody who reads media over the next 4 years. So, it's not that there isn't going to be some kind of moment where we say, right, the American press has ceased to exist, or where we say, right, the American press has won, and has maintained its independence. I think it's going to be a process of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 3 steps back and 4 steps forward. I mean, this is going to be one of the themes of the next 4 years. And so if you, again, if you care about it, if you, keep track of it and make sure that you're reading something that you trust and that you trust for good reasons, and make sure that if it's something that you can subscribe to, that you paid for it.
Or alternatively, it could be 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Folks, please make sure to check out Anne Applebaum's book, Autocracy, Inc. And thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Thanks so much.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.